when a full bill will be introduced into the House. At that time, we'll come back again and talk about how things have changed and progressed, and we will have the opportunity to make another submission at that time.
Thank you. Are there any high-level points you want to make in terms of the content that aren't already in the paper?
Not that aren't already contained in the paper.
Right. Councillors, can I just suggest we maybe just start with questions about the process as a whole in the paper, and then we can get on to the amendments? Has anyone got any questions, first of all? All right. So Councillor Paul is going to be introducing the paper and has got some, amendments which he will be introducing along with the paper. You are able to ask, I think we should ask questions before rather than during the debate. So is that okay?
Yeah. Madam Chair, I think it might be helpful, perhaps if just asking the substantive paper that council officers have provided.
Yeah, so let's just keep going on that one, and then we'll deal with the amendments
if required, and then we can go into debate regarding the additional amendments.
Okay, Councillor Condie.
Kia ora, thanks, team. Paragraph 26. I honestly wasn't entirely sure what this meant, and it kind of felt like it was code for something, and I just didn't have the code, and I was wondering if you could explain it to me. So it's talking about, we strongly recommend we examine the requirements of the Public Finance Act and its role influencing decisions, the ability of local government. What do we mean by that, and can we be maybe more specific about what we mean by that? Paragraph 26, page 17.
Through the Chair. So what this is intended to reference is, so we've got obligations that we have to meet in terms of our debt levels and how much debt we can carry on, what that means in terms of our level of infrastructure funding that we can provide to accommodate growth. So we've got some directives there which may not support actually realising some of the outcomes that the bill is trying to achieve and that we want through our plans.
I just think that would benefit from maybe a sentence clarifying that. It just kind of felt like you were expected to understand why the Public Finance Act was relevant, and I don't think we should assume that, or assume that it's necessarily clear what we mean.
So you could mention that in debate, but I think we would be happy to accept that. I think that seems like a reasonable point.
Paragraph 56, page 20. Talks about the present conflict between the competing objectives of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development and Fresh Water. And I was just wondering, I certainly accept that the MPS on fresh water kind of restricts some of what we can do in terms of greenfield and the MPSUD, but I felt like it was quite a strong statement to say that it was poor drafting, or that essentially we were sort of saying we felt like it was an unintended consequence. What evidence do we have that it was unintended? Because I kind of felt like it was the intention of the MPS in freshwater, it wasn't an unintended consequence.
Through the Chair, this point references evidence we've seen coming out where the definition of what is a wetland is so broad that any piece of muddy land somewhere near a stream that has species of grass that live in a wetland is considered a wetland, and as a result those areas are not able to be drained or considered for urban development. So what the cumulative effect of that is that the MPSUD is saying create well-functioning environments close to transport hubs, etc., develop at a pace and intensity and a density that allows more people to have homes, but we're being held up, or developments are now being made unviable by the presence of wetlands that aren't wetlands. So what we have asked of the Ministry is a refinement to that national policy statement that focuses more clearly on what a wetland is. So that is the conflict between those pieces of legislation.
Okay. To the extent that we're specifically talking about the wetlands issue, again, I think being clear that that's the specific thing might be quite helpful, because I think otherwise it just sort of says, it's a very sweeping statement. Paragraph 56, page 20. So yeah, if we've got a very, very specific point that we're making, I think it would be helpful to make that clear. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions? Councillor Rush, thank you.
Thanks. So, unfortunately, I wasn't sent the background documentation. I picked up a wee bit, but I'm interested in the Objective 3, give effect to the Principles Treaty. Paragraph 34, you say that the Council supports this significant shift in the way it's considered, but doesn't the current RMA have a treaty section, is it, in it, that requires us to give effect to the principles? So how is it? I mean, I know that there's also language around a Taumara review, which I think does actually extend things, but is that what you were meaning in terms of a significant shift?
Through the Chair, the current phraseology in the RMA is that people exercising functions under the Act have to have regard to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. What's proposed in the NBB is that those people give effect to. So in terms of legal language and directiveness, give effect to, through case law, has been determined to be a stronger direction than simply having regard to. So there is a greater onus and direction on decision makers and people exercising functions to account for the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi.
Right. And those principles, are they the ones set out in that 1987 Court of Appeal case? Or are they something else? Are they going to specify them in the legislation?
Through the Chair, so the Treaty of Waitangi itself has a number of principles which through court processes under the RMA have been the court has determined which are relevant for the purpose of resource management, and I provided that in my response to the questions. We need to recognise that as we move into this new system, there will be a period of legal examination again of how things sit relative to the new Act. So I can't give it a definitive answer, but there are some existing principles there.
It covers where I was coming from, which is that it seems quite vague, but I do think the paper actually makes that point and recognise that too. So hopefully maybe through the select committee process we can tighten it up.
Through the Chair, certainly I agree there. It would be useful if the Ministry and Parliament, as far as it can, gives clarity of how decision makers can give effect to the Treaty of Waitangi, and there will be multiple ways through the consideration of iwi management plans and the creation of a natural and built environment plan, but also when it comes to whatever the resource consent system looks like, how the principles need to be considered. If we can get that clarity, that would be beneficial and it help avoid some of the litigious stuff that we may come up against.
And I unfortunately didn't get to read the support paper, but does it reference consultation with mana whenua or is it with tangata whenua? Because it's a problem with the current RMA is that it doesn't mention mana whenua.
Through the Chair, throughout the draft bill, there are different references to either mana whenua, Māori, iwi, hapu. One of the points that we should introduce into the submission is requesting clarity as to which of those groups are decision makers or are planning committees supposed to interact with, because yes, I do agree there have been issues under the RMA where it's uncertain which Māori groups are to be consulted with.
Yeah.
Does that align with some of the amendments that Councillor Paul was wanting to bring?
Through the Chair, yes, it does.
Yes, so you would sort of think that that's worth doing. Right, thank you.
Can I just ask whether you are of the professional opinion that the system will actually be better? Because I was just reflecting, it's horribly complex. It still feels complex, and it already is. So I wonder if we've given that enough weight. I'm also just worried about the transitional provisions and the costs involved in that, just given we're spending literally millions of dollars on our new district plan. If it then eventuates that we have a regional plan, I'm presuming the government would not be so harsh as to make us do everything all over again, but I just wonder if we need to be a bit stronger on that.
Through the Chair, professionally, I am of the view that there needs to be change to the resource management system, and that the scale of change is such that further tinkering to the RMA would not achieve what we need for the future. I support a number of the proposals in the bill in terms of outcomes, the level of engagement and collaboration with mana whenua, and the consolidation of the national planning framework, national direction into a single unit. At this point, it is uncertain as to whether this proposed system will eventuate to the outcomes which we want and need in the resource management system. I think we also need to recognise that this piece of legislation isn't going to do everything, right? And so we have infrastructure issues, we can zone for housing, but we also need to put the pipes in the ground to be able to realise that capacity that we've created. So this isn't going to be the silver bullet to everything. We may be more convinced as we work through this parliamentary process that this is going in the right direction to achieve those outcomes. In terms of transitional provisions, I'm reasonably confident that everything we do, well, I'm totally confident that everything we're doing now is not going to be wasted in the new system. We will still have to deal with growth. We will still have to manage heritage, cultural, natural, environmental values. None of that is proposed to change in this new piece of legislation. There will need to be transitional provisions that are set out. We don't know what those are, but all we can do is hope that the government provides a lot of resource into assisting us to transition into this new system. But yeah, nothing that we're doing is wasted, and we need to respond to the issues that we have now because they will still be here in the future.
Okay. Right. Any other questions? Councillor Rush.
So, Adam, I'm guessing you're the author of all the questions I asked. So, one of the questions that I asked was how this interacts with Article 2 of the treaty, and I think your response was that the need to engage in the exercise by mana whenua of governorship transcends the lands that have been not just retained but also includes all land in Rohi. Is that about right?
Through the chair, so the question was how does Te Aoranga or Te Taio apply to both Māori land and private land? From what we can see in the draft bill, the concept of Te Aoranga or Te Taio applies to all land, so that concept applies not just to Māori land but to private land as well. We will see through the national planning framework and the direction that comes out of that what that means for Indigenous biodiversity on private land, what that means for freshwater on Māori land. So it's all encompassing.
Broader
yes.
than Article 2. Okay, thanks.
Right. Any other questions? Now, do people have questions? How do you want to handle that, Councillor? Would you rather just introduce the paper and then take questions on your amendments, or would you rather do them now? Yeah, okay. So sorry, apologies. I've just asked the advisor. I did speak to the Mayor and the Deputy Chair that I will move an amendment number 4 about appointing the 3 of us to speak to the Select Committee. So it will be a delegation rather than one person to give, a full round of perspectives and knowledge. And then I've just got, can we just put the amendments that I'm moving that's not part of the substantive up on... No. I just want to make sure that people have seen my questions first. So we'll just do that, and then we'll just make sure that people have understood what Councillor Paul's questions are, and then we'll move the paper. Yep. Would that be helpful to get? In fact,
Can I ask Tam?
We'll just take an adjournment of 5 minutes, also just to get all of the amendments printed out, and then that might be easier. Thank you. and Mr. Hodgetts will probably answer any there. Any questions? Oh, and I'm also just going to add the Deputy Chair to sign off on the submission too. Sorry, that was just another small one. Yes, Councillor Day.
As yours came down, you could switch it. Switch it with one of those.
Councillor Day? Was it?
Sorry.
Yeah.
A couple of them say emphasis, where I think they should say emphasise. Agree to emphasise the needs of local communities.
Okay, and that is me clearly not checking my grammar.
I was reading it wrong, but I'm
think-
pretty sure that B and C need to say emphasise.
And I'm glad you're a primary school teacher and that's the kind, you were teaching the kids that's what they should have been doing, so I'm very sorry. Right, Councillor Calvert and then Councillor Free.
I'm just wondering whether you can, because we had this issue with another paper where because you got 2 and then you got A, B, C, it makes it very difficult if you want to not agree with the amendments or have a.
We can take them separately.
All I'm just saying is you could, if you could just make sure that that's clear when you come to the.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, always happy to do that. That's why I do actually do them, partly because it's so to make it easy, but to do that too. Councillor Free.
So we are asking questions of officers of these
Yeah.
amendments?
Yep, if you want.
So I just would like some explanation around or what the unintended consequences might be of adopting the recommendation here from Councillor Paul, elevating the Te Rango or Te Taio to apply to the whole purpose rather than just to the natural environment.
Sorry, so I've got, through you, Madam Chair, I've got Adam here next to me, Councillor, and what I can say to councillors, we reviewed all of the amendments that have been passed on by Councillor Pannett and Councillor Paul, and we're comfortable with what's being suggested. I think Adam can talk more detail about implications, if any, from the intent of those amendments. But at this stage, officers are quite comfortable including them in the substantive submission, apart from 2A, which Adam can speak to.
Yeah, so it was 2A that I actually wanted to ask why that might be complicated.
Yeah, that's fine.
Through the chair. So in the context of resource management legislation, my advice has been that while it's really admirable that well-being of the urban environment or well-being apply to the urban environment as well, we could achieve a better and more clear outcome by elevating to the purpose of this legislation the creation of well-functioning urban environments. And emphasising urban development alongside Te Oranga or Te Taio. So we've got that natural environment and the health and wellbeing of the natural environment alongside and elevating what's currently missing is recognising the benefits of creating well-functioning urban environments. So I totally agree that urban development and urban environments can contribute to people's wellbeing by enabling housing to be built, which is positive, providing it's healthy and warm and dry and insulated and all that sort of stuff, meets healthy homes. That does contribute to your wellbeing, but as a piece of resource management legislation, we need to be a bit more focused on urban development.
Can I ask a follow-on question from that? Because I will be supporting Councillor Paul on this. You make a point earlier that the integrated approach to the built and the natural environment is important. So I guess I saw that as being consistent with that point, and also just obviously we're wanting really to elevate and include the Māori worldview. So can you just examine that a bit more?
Through the chair, in terms of an integrated approach, certainly I support the integrated management of built environments and natural environments for the reason that anything we do in the built environment will affect the natural environment. By the way that we build, where we build, the pollution that we create, the way that we commute from different areas to one another. But necessarily there are different management approaches, in my view, that we need to take to those two different forms of the environment.
Okay. Councillor Rush. Thank you.
So Adam, just on that last point, and it goes to the earlier point about some of the vagueness. I mean, Te Māori worldview. I've worked in the freshwater space, and it something very beneficial, and you can actually understand it and, I suppose, put it mentally into your own sort of categories. But when we talk about something like a wastewater network or sewage treatment plant, which never existed in in a multi-world view, I'm just a little unsure about how we apply it, or do you follow me? I'm just sort of. I mean, other than we know that we want to ensure the mana of the water is protected, but other things like electricity development and those sorts of things, which are sort of hallmarks of a 21st century city. So I'm just a little unsure about how that sort of those I suppose challenges of modern challenges can be, I suppose, categorised into a Maori worldview. And is there any sort of I suppose carve-outs to, allow, modern engineering techniques and so forth to prevail?
I think that Councillor Paul might be a better person to speak to that and has some expertise in this area. I'm not sure that Adam is the best person. I would say that the Māori worldview and practices do evolve over time, Councillor.
Yeah, well, and that's an important point to consider.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Any other questions?
Sorry, is anyone going to answer my question?
Well, I think Councillor Paul can.
And write a reply.
I think she can address that. I'm not sure Mr. McCutcheon is really an expert in the tikanga. He is an expert in resource management.
Okay, well.
I shouldn't make any assumptions, but. Right. Okay. Any other questions?
Yep. So 2B talks about little guidance for councils on how to fulfil their treaty obligations, but the councils are not party to the treaty, and it's the Crown who is the party, and councils are not the Crown nor agents of the Crown. So where does the treaty obligation spring from? Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay.
But can I just make the point too that we've had this discussion a number of times, and we have decided that we will fulfil our obligations.
Well, no, we haven't.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, through the chair, I think it's quite clear that we do have a statutory obligation to fulfil the obligations of the Treaty of Waitangi, and that local government is a partner to the treaty as an agent of the Crown.
So that's what he's just. You can talk to that in debate. Right. Next. Any other questions? Sorry. Yes, Councillor Conde.
Cool. I guess on the 2A, in terms of thinking about the concept of oranga in relation to the built environment, I guess trying to understand what the implications of that might be, and how that relates to amenity. I guess I was kind of getting caught up. There was lots of conversation about amenity and the challenges that we have around amenity, and how possibly taking this kind of concept of oranga might help us to reframe amenity. So I guess if you've got any thoughts about how you see this interacting with kind of amenity values within.
Through the chair, I think part of my hesitation in including oranga in the concept of the built environment is that it was less certain than trying to focus on the creation of well-functioning urban environments, which through the MPSUD we've had really clear direction about growth around transport, growth close to city centre, allowing people to live, work and play within the same area, intergenerational needs for housing. There's been a lot of increased understanding over the past year about achieving that, and I think that is where we were better focused in elevating to the purpose of this piece of legislation. In terms of the amenity values concept, I think, again, in the paper I expressed that we've come a long way in our understanding of amenity values over the past year under the MPSUD, and that amenity values will still always have them, in my view. Council commissioned a piece of work looking at how much, what is the level of sunlight, what is the level of open space that we need, and as we enter an increasingly densifying Wellington city, we still need that. Those are amenity values. And it's fine that they change over time because we have a different context now.
Okay, so but Councillor Paul will speak. I mean, she knows what she means. Yeah,
But
yeah,
I still-
yeah.
I'll ask you in debate as well.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things is that when we talk about amenity, particularly when we're having debates with the community, I guess, and maybe this is the difference between having a conversation and having a legal document, is that people think about amenity in terms of the value of their property, whereas if we're framing it, what I was interested in is if we start framing it as oranga, then we are framing it more as the health and well-being benefits of those amenities rather than framing it as a kind of financial benefit or a different kind of benefit that people might have.
Okay, so you can
I guess
address that. And I think Councillor Paul understands what she means. I think we're just getting a bit into...
Can we get, this is a really tricky way to do this because Councillor Paul hasn't introduced it. I'm finding it a bit hard because we're kind of drawing officers into what is really a debate.
And I think she has drafted it understanding.
It'd actually be better if Councillor Paul introduced it, and then if we have questions of staff around anything specific, that might make it easier because we haven't heard Councillor Paul's context. I'm struggling to understand why it's not supported because I haven't heard Tam's reasoning.
I was just trying to keep the separation clear. And I do feel that people have, elected members have a right to understand what they mean. So, you know,
through you, Madam Chair, we had a question time with officers, and the advice I provided to the Chair is that most of the submissions that have been lodged by councillors are accepted by officers, in terms of their content, except for the one that Adam just spoke to. So I think, am I clear? Yep. So we're comfortable with all of the amendments and for debate to now take place when Councillor Paul introduces her.
Okay. Are there any other questions that aren't on, that's something that Councillor Paul will address in her introduction? Anything else?
I've got some questions for officers that are related to your amendments, but are we going to do those later?
No, go for that now, just so we can... And then I'll see if I need to answer it when I introduce them or whether it's just something that we can... I'd just like to get this part out of the way and then we can,
So I'm looking at the wording, agree to support the inclusion of precautionary approach to preventing irreversible harm to human beings as a result of threats. So this is 5A. Can you explain to me how this is different to what the submission currently says and what the effects of that would be?
So it's not actually stated at the moment that we support the precautionary approach, so I just wanted that to be included and just to include that it's got human effects as well as effects on the natural environment, i.e. if there is a flood and someone is killed, that is a effect.
Yeah, I'm finding this, I'm struggling because I'm asking questions and then you're basically saying actually...
Well, no, but I do need to answer that. It is not in the submission if you've read it, so it's not in there. Yeah.
Through the Chair, yes, so we don't state in the submission that we support the precautionary approach specifically. We say that we support the framework as it is, so it's a component of that, but it's not said specifically, so that I understand is the intent of the amendment.
What is the precautionary approach and what is it in this context?
So shall I deal with that?
Okay, so the precautionary approach is a concept that when we are setting environmental limits, so freshwater limits, how much nitrogen can we discharge into a waterway, we need to take a precautionary approach, and that if we don't have all of the evidence, we should lower that limit, not allow as much pollution as we think that waterway can sustain. That is the precautionary principle. It's currently used in other legislation like the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf Effects Act, so it does have quite a well understood meaning.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, so you've finished Councillor Condi. Okay, so Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. I just want to know how our submission compares to perhaps some of the other urban councils, and I know LGNZ have been working on their submission this week. So is there any key things that we don't agree with, or so just if you've got any insight.
Through the Chair. So our submission is focused on the extent to which these proposals will achieve the objectives. So that is recognising that there's a hell of a lot of gaps in this exposure draft at the moment, and there's not a lot of time or point in second guessing what might come. a lot of the other submissions will go down to the detail of every definition and whether that is appropriate. But, as this framework develops, I think we're better to focus on the higher level proposals here. There are there's sort of a couple of proposals which our submission says we think there are better ways of doing this, and that is focused around the planning committees and the scope of natural and built environment plans, where they're proposed to be a region-wide plan. We suggest there could be an alternative which is focused around the common communities of interest of Wellington City, the Hutt Valley and Pūroro, and also the common receiving environments that we share. That's probably one of the most substantial parts of the submission. It also addresses the governance side of the regionalisation of plan making.
I think Councillor Calvert's asked a fair enough question. So, are you sort of thinking like, for example, is Auckland and LGNZ supporting regional plan making as opposed to local plan making? Is that the kind of thing that you're interested in, or amenity values?
Yeah,
or
I suppose it was more the question because of the amendments coming through. I can understand how you've done the submission, and it does seem quite agnostic is a word to say, and keeping it up here. I suppose what I'm just trying to understand is other councils going down to even some of the detail, or the, without getting into debate, emphasis on the natural environment. That seems to be coming through with the amendments, but I don't want you to comment on those. But it's just really, I was just interested to understand how other councils.
So just to add to Mr. McCutcheon's advice through you, Madam Chair, Councillor Calvert and I were actually on that Policy Advisory Group and Governance and Strategy Advisory Group of LGNZ, and there was a number of attachments to those papers, and they were quite detailed. So my comment would be, and to Mr. McCutcheon's earlier point, we kept this high level because it is quite a high level first exposure draft. I think you'll find, Councillor, that some of the details, particularly in the Local Government New Zealand submission, we're sort of almost preempting and predicting where the next phase of legislation development will go. We've chosen to keep it high level. But the key points are still there. There's a concern around localism and the ability for councils to have a say in plan making, representation around the regional plan making component, and of course the general understanding or lack of understanding of what is a region, and what's the community of interest in Wellington, Pūroro and the Huts. We have similar catchments, we have similar employment profiles. Our journey to work data suggests we've got a closer relationship to those metropolitan councils than perhaps the larger Wellington region. And is there a different way to look at how we think about regional planning committees? But generally speaking, I think they're all still consistent.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, thank you. Right, well, Councillor Paul, over to you to introduce the paper. Thank you.
Move the paper, yeah.
Move the papers.
Cool.
Well, you might need to do some political introductions, so go for it.
Okay, all right. Well, I was hoping to keep it brief, that's all right. So kia ora ana koutou katoa. Yep. So here is our submission to the Select Committee on the RMA reforms, which are still very broad. We all got a copy of that big Randerson report, which outlined the problems and the opportunities, which I hope, we wouldn't have all read it. So yeah, this submission is really on the high principles of what we'd like to see in the reform. I think it's really important because the new system will need to manage not necessarily manage, but address major issues like climate change, housing, the housing crisis, and Te Tiriti o Waitangi and what that means. So yeah, I just want to thank officers, particularly Adam, for putting together this submission. It's really good, really detailed. It covers all the really important issues which we have to stick to at such a high level. I agree that the need for resource management reform is necessary. And I guess we've all read the papers, we all know the background information. In regards to my amendments, the first one on the concept of te oranga o te taiao. So I think often there's this kind of assumption that our legislation and policies that come from it operate on a neutral principle neutral basis when actually they don't. A lot of our legislation is guided by different principles. For example, principles from neoliberal principles, one of those being efficiency. So that's the concept of low input of resources and trying to get the maximum kind of amount of output from that. But the reality is that the things that govern our day-to-day lives aren't values neutral. And so there's been a movement of incorporating tikanga Māori or Māori principles into different policies and legislation. So we saw through the National Policy Statement on fresh water the concept of te mana o te wai, and with this reform we're looking at this principle of te oranga o te taiao, which is basically the well-being of the environment and its ability to support life and support different generations to come. And it's at the moment it's restricted to considerations around the natural environment. I believe it should encompass the entire substance of the Act. So it should be relevant in all senses, not just to the natural environment, but it should consider well-being for future generations on the built environment as well. It doesn't really make sense to me to have a principle that only applies to half of the bill. And I think it's an important consideration to have when looking at when people are exercising the power under this Act in relation to resource consents and plans as well. So, yeah, and I think that's enabling the expression of tikanga Māori in legislation and allowing more broad application of that as well. The second one, and the rest is really asking for clarity. I think we've had this conversation a lot of times around the table that we don't actually understand what our obligations are under Te Tiriti, and I think we've done a really, really good job at manifesting a really positive relationship under the Te Tiriti so far, but it would be good to have consistency across local authorities everywhere about what that relationship means, because at the moment it's kind of ad hoc pieces scattered throughout different pieces of legislation and it's not very consistent. Yeah, and I guess it just also says that local councils are kind of at the cutting edge of those relationships. Obviously the Crown can't have a relationship with every hapu and iwi in this country, so it's really important that we have that really good local relationship and that it's an ongoing and living, breathing relationship. So it's asking for clarity around that and asking that in the kind of process that they are creating and new system that they're creating, that they honour the discrete mana of hapu and iwi everywhere and don't centralise it too much, because that could lead to different voices having less of a voice at the table or dilute those opinions a bit more. So I just used my preliminary understandings of the resource management system and my understandings of the treaty to bring forward some suggestions. The reason they're so lengthy is because I thought it would save them time so they can copy paste it in there rather than having to interpret what I would like them to say. So yeah, thank you and looking forward to the debate.
Kia ora. Have you got a seconder?
Oh, no, I don't. Would anyone like a second? Oh, thank you, Councillor Day.
Would you like to speak? Right. Look, what I'll do is introduce my amendments now, and then hopefully we can just before morning tea. Is that okay? And then we can. So look, I'm very grateful to my colleagues here, to the staff. Adam has been a star, diligently working away and trying to understand what's going on. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of my colleague, Councillor Paul. I've never met such a young person so passionate about planning. Usually it's about, law or ecology or history, but no, it's planning with Councillor Paul, and it's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much for your leadership here. So look, I've just been thinking about my experience in dealing with the RMA as a politician, an activist, as a resource consent commissioner, and you could say it is one hot mess, but unfortunately you could also say that that's exactly what we're going to through this reform process. I think there's some really fantastic things in here. The moving away from effects to outcomes is very, very, very important. The list that they have given of those outcomes is comprehensive and will be really helpful for decision makers. In saying that, it's going to be very difficult to balance all of those things, so good luck to those people who will be doing that. And so that's why I did ask some questions around the complexity and whether we're actually making it easier for people. It is very, very difficult for people who are not planners or lawyers to navigate the system and even to find the money to participate in it. It's really, really hard. So I'm glad that you've really emphasised, Councillor Paul, that point around resourcing Māori, because you do need the resources. I think the costs are important too. I think I do have some concerns around these regional plans. The amount of money that will need to be brought to the table will be very, very significant. And I think whilst there might be great expectations that we will be efficient in developing these regional plans, there could be a real loss of institutional knowledge, waste of time and money when we have to do things again. I'm really grateful that there is such an emphasis on the biophysical environment, on environmental limits, on the precautionary approach. Apologies, Councillor Conti, I sort of assumed that it was kind of a known thing, so I'll talk to it about in the amendment what it actually means. I also just have a question around whether they've actually dealt adequately with the issue of meeting the needs of future generations. This, of course, is a very, very critical environmental principle. Of course, in the world of Te Ao Māori, I like the Aboriginal principle too of thinking of 7 generations. But really, I don't think we've got the mechanisms in there to adequately protect the needs of future generations, and so it will be very much incumbent on the planning, the local involvement to take those needs into consideration. So basically, yes, I do want us to explicitly support the inclusion of the precautionary approach, which is defined in the bill as such, as an approach that in order to protect the natural environment, if there are threats of serious or irreversible harm to the environment, favours taking action to prevent those adverse effects rather than postponing action on the ground there is a lack of full scientific certainty. So my amendment is to support that. Very, very important principle, and also just to include the fact that humans are very, very negatively impacted by irreversible harm to our environment as well. And we've just obviously seen some horrific incidences around the world where climate is starting to take an impact and people are literally dying. This is an ecological crisis, which is the next point, that the officers did pick up the declaration of the climate emergency, but didn't sort of make a point around the ecological emergency, and they're happy just to make a point that this is why there is such a critical need to protect the biophysical environment, because we know that we're having catastrophic loss of species, of their environments, and partly due to climate change. Number 2 is about making sure that the needs of local communities have input, and as we have discussed it extensively, that doesn't just mean the usual people that we hear from, that means all people in our community, and giving an emphasis to those who are powerless, but also giving the emphasis that we must consider the needs of future generations, because we haven't always done that. Look, as you know, I do have background in taking legal appeals. I do want to say that I think where we have significant matters of public or environmental interest, that you should be able to make an appeal. I think it is presumptuous of any lawmaker to think that we would have all the knowledge, that sometimes environmentalists, business interests may need to take legal action, say as we saw through King Salmon, and with some quite significant impacts, and I think that is important. And while I've said I think the environmental limits are critical, I do want to emphasise that we tightly define them and that they are enforced, and they are not seen to be flexible when we have some other pressing needs. The environment is finite, and this is our fundamental issue that we have to grapple with. We must meet human need, and I believe there are enough resources to do that, but we also must respect those limits. So Councillor Foon will be seconding, and I'm just wondering do you want to speak now? No. Okay. Shall we just take our break now, and then people can come into debate? Is that okay with everyone? Or would you like to keep going for a few more minutes? Are people going to debate? Yeah. Right. Okay, all right. So we will come back at 11:15 and we will continue. Thank you. Yep. Thank you, everyone. I hope you had a good break. Right, who would like to go on the speaking list? And maybe if you just speak once, if you want. Or yeah. Councillor Calvert, thank you.
Okay, I'll be very brief and I'll speak to everything. I think this National Built Environment, Natural Built Environment Bill. I'm pleased to see that officers have taken a, I suppose, more principle-based approach in terms of our feedback. I mean, we know the devil's in the detail, but having to consider what might potentially be in the detail, it just opens up a whole can of worms. I was pleased to see that it's really important to have a well-functioning urban environment, and then this is probably why I won't be supporting Councillor Pennant your amendments. There seems to be an overemphasis on the natural environment other than what's already there. We do have to be able to build stuff. And I know it's achieving that balance, but I think your putting that in actually just sways the emphasis a bit more. And and when I think about how much effort we go into saving sometimes a few snails, I just have to think, are we really got our emphasis right? And also, I won't be supporting Councillor Paul's Te amendments. I think it's already there, and also we're unsure still of all the details. And I just would like to ensure that we've got to take a very balanced approach to this. And so I will support the initial submission, but not the amendments.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? We don't have to, it's not for Councillor Fitzsimons and then Councillor Rush. Councillor Condi, who would like to go first?
I'll go.
Thank you, Councillor Condi.
I think, first of all, I just want to say that I think the submission's excellent from the officers. Thank you very much. I think it makes really constructive suggestions about how we could go forward with plan making, which I always think is great when we disagree with a proposal in a submission, that we make a constructive alternative suggestion. Councillor Paul, maybe you can discuss in your right of reply around the oranga concept for the urban environment. I'm really interested and sort of supportive of this. I think I see it as something that can sit alongside officers' recommendations in paragraph 16, where they talk about wanting there to be a clear purpose that talks about well-functioning urban environments. I see that I'm interested in this idea of bringing oranga to that purpose. I guess and as I said, probably indicated in the questions, I'm interested in how we might kind of start rethinking about amenity with more of an oranga lens, and in a way that might actually help us to narrow some of what amenity means. So keen for any thoughts you have about all of that. Councillor Pennant, I'm probably going to support A and C and E, but I've got a few questions about B and D. I've got some concerns about B, that you're talking about that these two sort of feel like they cancel each other out in terms of how they'll actually result in change. You talk about emphasising the need of local communities to have input, and yet you also want to have regard to the needs of future generations. Well, when push comes to shove, when we're actually trying to make these decisions and having consultation with the community, those two things don't always go hand in hand. I think it's clear that sometimes the concerns of the local communities are very immediate and are concerned with sort of more individual concerns, which is legitimate. And we don't have that focus on the future generations. So I'm not sure that I can support that at this point. Equally with D, I think, one of the issues with the RMA is the, immense appeals process. And I think, I could maybe support it if you wanted it to just be about environmental, but public for me throws it open to be almost anything, and kind of just refutes the purpose of saying there won't be appeals if we then say actually there can be appeals for anything. So I don't think I'll be supporting that either. I just think that both of those kind of are pushing, for me, in the wrong direction that I want to see the reforms going, where I think there are some important issues. But just wanted to thank both of you for all the work on keeping on top of this. It's a massive and really important piece of mahi, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Fitzsimons and then Councillor Rush.
Yeah, just briefly, I too want to thank the officers for the work on this. I did want to just raise a couple of points around, I'm very happy and have the utmost of confidence in Mayor Foster, Councillor Pannett and Councillor Paul to speak at this to the submission. But I do wonder, and maybe you can address this in your right of reply or change it if you think, whether it could be useful to have a council officer like Adam present as well, because they may well expect this council to be able to answer quite detailed technical questions. And that, yeah, so if that's accepted, I think that would be helpful. And I guess just, Councillor Pannett, your amendments, I'm concerned about the need to include emphasise the needs of local communities to have input, and also requiring that appeals should be allowed, because I think when you introduced this amendment, you talked about that we should have the ability to have appeals because it's not about having all the knowledge. But for me, the needs of local communities, putting quite a lot of emphasis into the interests of people who already live in these communities, and the ability to use the legal system to delay and add expense have been one of the major problems in this area of law. So for me, I want to make it more streamlined. I want to make it quicker. I want to make sure that people who don't yet live in these areas or aren't yet born have their interests taken into account. So I won't be supporting either of those, and I don't think that the appeal process is one where it's a genuine access to justice issue, because the people who have the least access to justice are the people who are already being left out of this important area of urban planning and use of resources.
Thank you. Councillor Rush.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks again to officers. I guess from my personal perspective, having the workshop while we're on holiday is simply not good process, and as a consequence, I don't feel I've really had the time to really look more closely than this piece of work deserves. I would favour a shorter statement of broad support, but that we would add more detail after the select committee process. I mean, I mentioned to Mr Hodgetts that I think from my perspective, 70% of the paper is broadly in line with what I would put, but 30% I'd probably word differently, more of an emphasis rather than substance. And where there are uncertainties, and I would highlight that there are key uncertainties, particularly in the treaty space, and the ambiguities between the treaty principles, which talk about the Crown's sovereignty, and then the judicial judgments of the Waitangi Tribunal, which say something different. And I think the government should be encouraged to really try and clear up exactly what we're talking about in the space as best we can, because we as policy makers, decision makers, will have to figure out all these things, and that will possibly lead to more uncertainty. So I'd like to have seen more certainty. I didn't see the Randall report. Well, not sure I received a copy either, but I noticed that the exposure draft is not following the recommendations of the Randall report. I understand that it's more Randall Plus, is what the MFE described it as. I really enjoyed the explanation given by Councillor Paul of the importance of Te Ranga o Te Tau, and I was minded actually just on that alone to support these, but the other areas that I've mentioned unfortunately mean that I won't be supporting the draft. I think we should be doing something shorter at this early stage to enable us a bit more time after the select committee process to do something that's more broadly circulated and understood, at least by me.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Kia ora. So I would like to also thank staff for their mahi on this. It's pretty impressive, but would also like to acknowledge Councillor Paul for her wero to the government through this submission. I guess the starting point of these bills, it's a Western worldview that we start from, and by acknowledging Te Oranga o Te Taiao in a deeper way is actually challenging the government to consider how we could look at this differently. And I think in a submission it's a really good thing to bring up, and so thanks, Councillor Paul. I think it's a really important aspect of our submission that we can put in. It's not necessarily saying how we see it turning out, but to say, actually, let's consider this in a broader sense is really important. So thank you. And also, alongside Councillor Condie and Councillor Fitzsimons, I won't be supporting 5A or D, and that really is because actually the spatial plan really showed to me, the process showed to me how people can actually really try and stop the opportunities for future generations. So, and the processes at the moment work for them, and I think this is empowering those processes to continue, which actually aren't empowering us to make the changes we need. So I will not be supporting those. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Yeah. And then I'll do my right of reply to the amendments, and then you do your right of reply. Yep. Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to say the B is a little bit hard to support because you, with your have regard to the needs of future generations, I just feel like that have regard to isn't emphasised enough. And, you know, you look at the RMA, you've got like have regard to, take into account, give expression to. So if you strengthen those wordings...
Would you like give effect? Happy to do that? Yep. The seconder is happy? Yeah. Yes, I know that. But would give effect be satisfactory? Absolutely. No problem there.
Sorry, I meant B and D when I was speaking. I've confused people.
Yeah. I was wondering why you're...
Yep. Okay, so you're saying with B, you're saying make sure that local communities have the opportunity to input into the system and ensure that...
we'd give it the same weight as the treaty...
What, the needs of local communities?
No. Give rather than just having regard, give effect to, so they'd have to do it.
Of local, of future generations?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Basic. So if we... And
I won't support D.
Oh, yep.
Because of the public... the public or environmental interest. I agree with what Dr. Condie, Councillor Condie was saying about, I support the environmental interest, but I think the public ones just throw it open a bit too wide. But anyway,
Well, I'm happy to take public out. So I want to make two changes and I need leave of the committee. So give effect. So let's use the RMA language. Number 2, and the government has to give effect to the needs of future generations and the community, and we'll take out public from... Well, no, I'm just taking feedback. It's perfectly... No, because I like to be collaborative, and also I think it's fair enough feedback. So we're not asking officers now, I'm just asking whether we have to debate it. Okay, so we'll just... Yeah. Sorry, did someone... Oh, people have objected? Sorry. Okay, so, thank you. Councillor Free, I will talk to that. Then we'll have to debate it because, sorry, can I move, or someone else would have to move that the word is changed. Deputy Mayor Free is a Green. I'm sorry. I've never talked to you. I know.
I also do take on board the fact that I don't know much about legal things, but I do know you can tie yourself up in knots quite easily.
All right.
With just the mere words of change of a couple of words. And so...
Deputy Mayor Free. Anyway, I will explain that to you in my right of reply. Okay, so the words...
Actually, to be quite honest, I think it's irresponsible to be just changing legal words like that. It's just a submission, but then expect us to, treat it the same as something that has been through an officer's view and we've had advice on.
Yeah, could you...
So through you, Madam Chair, I've just checked in with Adam. It's immaterial, this change in language, so the draft legislation is already quite strong, so I think you don't need to be concerned, Councillor.
So are you still objecting to changing the words?
Not now. I know that it doesn't make...
Yeah. No, that's why I'm just checking the room. Does anyone want to raise objections to changing those to, so removing public and then just saying giving effect to? Yeah. Right, thank you. Okay, so look, I'll just do a brief, sorry, Councillor Matthews and then Councillor Foon. Apologies, Councillor Matthews.
Kia ora koutou. So I guess I just want to, first of all, thank officers for their work on this submission and Councillors Paul and Pannett, for your leadership. Thank you very much. I'm excited about some of this change and this kind of changing environment that we're in and the potential that it gives us. And I guess I just quickly want to, on the amendments, I'll be supporting Councillor Paul's. Councillor Pannett, I'm afraid B and D are not, even with the change of word, are not something that I can support. I think you're trying to put stuff back in that I want taken out, basically. And I guess, a couple of points I wanted to make to say, oh, it's not just, existing communities or whatever. It actually, the systemic inequalities that are there, you just can't sort of overcome by, it's just, it's too deep. So I don't support that. And I would also note that even environmental protections or environmental legislation is used increasingly around the world to stop progress on things that are actually good for the environment. So I've been listening and reading a lot about Jerusalem DMSAS in the United States and the way that their protections are actually used to stop public transport projects and to stop housing. So, in the hands of rich people who are powerful, even environmental protections can be used to stop things that are actually good for the planet. And yeah, so that's basically why I won't be supporting those two amendments, but thanks everybody for your work.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Foon. Kia ora koutou. Once again, thank you to the officers who did the work over this. So I'm speaking to the substantive, and also to Councillor Paul and Councillor Pannett for your amendments. Just speaking to the amendments, I will be supporting Councillor Pannett's amendments, particularly B and D, and this is due to experience with local community, and I agree we have seen we've got a mighty story to tell out of what came out of the spatial plan, but equally we've seen other stories to tell around communities gathering around issues too, in defence of the environment, and I guess that Councillor Pannett and I have had that experience around protesting the bypass that we have running through our city now, which could be providing more housing, which people have come out and said that this is not really the best result for our city. So, so I guess it can go two ways. So that's kind of where I'm landing, and I will be supporting. And yeah, just big congratulations to Councillor Paul on bringing your amendments today. Really appreciate that. Kia ora.
Thank you. Any other last speakers before we do the two rights of reply?
Okay. So look, Councillor Calvert, I'm surprised that you've got some concerns, because you know that I'm very supportive of protecting the built environment, and I did make some comments around the importance of integrating the built and the natural environment. But ultimately, and this is the problem, and I will respond to you, Councillor Matthews, too, the points that you made, is that we have been sometimes in Western cultures overly casual about the natural environment, but it is the natural environment which supports life. We cannot live without it. And so making sure that we have this, this strong commitment, and which is what the Randerson report said, which this bill actually tries to say, we must protect those biophysical limits. If we do not, we cannot survive as a species, and certainly the other species that inhabit this planet with us cannot survive too. And we know that that's happening. They are losing their habitats with devastating consequences. So I'm certainly, Councillor Calvert, very, very supportive of protecting the built environment as well, but I think they need to be held together. Yeah, so let me just respond to this point about local communities, because under the thinking that is being raised here, you would have just said, oh, well, it's just the Mount Victoria community and they don't like an ugly flyover in their back garden, when that was not the driver. I set up the campaign. The campaign was for the benefit of future generations. This was, from an environmental perspective, an undesirable way to manage the environment. We needed to put public transport through, put walking and cycling, beautiful public spaces, not a motorway. And so to say that local communities never come with good intentions. King Salmon is another very, very, very critical case. We thank goodness the environmentalists won. We cannot keep overfishing. We just can't. And I guess that's sometimes where there is some conflict at a very philosophical level between socialism, capitalism and environmentalism. You know, we do see that there are limits. And I think that the public has a huge role in challenging the status quo authorities around the way we are protecting our environment. And I think it's really important that we do challenge Parliament hard on how we are actually going to protect the needs of future generations, because actually how can any of us actually do that adequately when we don't know what people will need in 200 or 300 or 500 years, which is kind of more my time frame rather than just the next 20 years. But I think it's the Resource Management Act always had a strong philosophical base in public participation. The public have made the law better by taking legal cases. And I'm sorry, Councillor Fitzsimons, there's actually a lot of environmental law. It's not just about housing. That's what might be where your concern is, but there are many, many cases that have been taken around a whole lot of issues which are really, really, really important. And if people hadn't been brave enough with no money, you know, all of us who've done this sort of thing have done little fundraisers to go against the power of the state, and it's been really tough. And it's very, very important that we challenge that. And in fact, the fact that we won on the flyover actually changed the whole thinking of this council, and now everyone's kind of on the right track. But we had to win it first. And I do think in a democracy, allowing participation are critical. You know, like the legal system should be the servant, not the master of the public. Genuine access to justice is a huge issue, and even for Pākehā, it's not working. It's so broken, and that's why it actually needs to be made more simple, and it's not doing particularly well. Just the last point, I take the point around system inequalities, which is why there are some ways to do that, which is why I will be strongly supporting, for example, Councillor Paul's amendment, that we do bring Māori world thinking in and don't start arguing over the meanings of it. And there are ways, and we have seen some amazing leadership from Māori through this resource management process to protect the environment. And I would be a little bit sceptical. Environmentalists like public transport. It would be a funny kind of environmentalist who didn't like that. And I just take you back to that point, Councillor Matthews. The environment as a whole must be taken into account if we are to survive and thrive into the future. So what we'll just do now is we will vote, and we'll vote on these, and then we'll go to Councillor Paul's right of reply. We will take them separately, and we'll take a division on all of them, take it as slow as we need to. Right, so the precautionary approach we are voting on first. Can you just tell me when it's all set up? Sorry. Oh, right, okay, cool. Thank you. Oh, yeah, could we, sorry, I'm not sure if we...
So the vote is 5A.
So it's 5A. Have you got the piece of precautionary approach is what we're voting on at the moment? Sorry, I know it's a bit difficult with all the screens. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, Sean. Appreciate that. Sorry, we can't see you, Rebecca, so that's helpful. Okay, number 2. Oh, sorry, I can't see looking at these screens. Okay, so this is about emphasising the needs of local communities and, yep, that's right.
It's 5A. Is the 5A passed?
Oh, yes.
5A passed.
Yes, okay, sorry. I'm just doing, oh, sorry, the amendments with the adding things on. Yep. Oh, okay, thank you. Yep, sorry, I was just kidding.
So that is lost.
Okay, right. And number 3, the ecological emergency, acknowledging the ecological emergency. 5C. No. Thank you. State appeals should be allowed on where environmental interests are concerned. Number 4, or D, sorry, 5D. Okay, thank you. And number 5, environmental limits. 5A. Okay, thank you. And now 3 and 4, that was just about...
Is delegating.
Oh, the deputy chair, and sorry, Councillor Fitzsimons, an officer, of course, will come along to the submission. That's a fair enough point. So if we could just vote on, do we need to vote for those separately? Hopefully not. Okay, so number 3 is 3 and 4. Yeah.
3 and 6.
6 on the paper, yes.
4. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Now, generally, the delegations are that it is the chair who signs off submissions, isn't it, rather than the mayor? But if it was going to council, then it would be the mayor. But of course, I'm happy to talk to the mayor.
Happy to be talked to.
It's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
So do you want to do 3 and 4 separately?
3 and 4 separately, or
Together's fine.
yeah, yeah. I hope our deputy chairs will always be involved. There you go.
What happened to the first one, by the way? First one was
5A
carried.
5A was carried.
5A, C, and E were carried. The other 2 were lost.
Cool, right.
Okay.
13 and 3.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Jenny and Terry? Okay, lovely, thank you. Right, now Councillor Paul, if you'd like to do the full right of reply. Thank you.
Thank you for the great debate. Just responding to some points, Councillor Condi around the concept of oranga in the urban environment and in relation to amenity. I think for me, this is so obviously in the RMA as it is, it's got the hierarchy of things to consider. And I think that oranga as a high level principle overarching the entire piece of legislation would mean in relation to amenity that it's more of a criterion which you might weigh up amenity against other things that you would consider in a plan or in a resource consent. So I can't say exactly what that would look like, but my assumption would be that, you know, if you're considering something like sunlight and you're looking at a plan, you might be more inclined to look at things like the provision of, you know, healthy housing like Adam was talking about, but you might, when considering things like sunlight, have more consideration to like the provision of green space within a plan as opposed to an individual housing. And I think the concept of oranga is about moving away from the kind of individual sense that, you know, maybe you're going to get sunlight at your individual house. Actually, in a communal sense, how can we provide the community's need for housing as well as the community's need for sunlight and those good community spaces all over the place. So that's just an example, but it speaks to the hierarchy of considerations within the bill and how that would overarch the built environment as well as a criteria, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answers your question, as opposed to only considering it in relation to the natural environment. Because then actually, if you don't have it as an overarching principle on both the built and natural environment, then we might be inclined to let things like amenity overcome the value of the oranga of the natural environment, if that makes sense. Because it's not overarching both of those kinds of elements. Councillor Rush, such a long time ago that you talked, but you talked about the principles of the treaty, Article 2. I think that the government are making a really clear stance in using te tiriti instead of the treaty in the legislation, and I think there is a difference. Personally, I believe there is a difference between the two documents, and although they say in the report and in the exposure bill that they are still referring to the meaning of the Treaty of Waitangi, I think it's still a symbolic, important step to use the phrasing of te tiriti, and I think through the subsequent development of a national policy statement on te tiriti or some national guidance through the national planning framework, that will provide us with a lot of clarity about what those differences are and what they mean. And I was a bit confused there about whether you're going to support my amendments or not. But I mean, like I said in the beautiful article about you over the break, I love your open mind, and I hope that you will consider my amendments. I guess the last thing I would say is I do know and acknowledge that internationally environmental legislation does have the kind of perverse outcome in that it does hamper the development of public transport and housing. But for me, I don't know what the alternative to that is. Like I do believe in strong, appropriate environmental protection. I believe that our streams and our wetlands and many of our species have suffered and are in decline now because our towns and agriculture have been built over top of them. For me, as a rangatahi Māori, we have no identity without the natural environment. Our whakapapa, and all of us, our whakapapa is to our maunga, our awa, and all of the parts of our natural environment, and I do think that they need to be protected, but they should not be, but communities with needs for things like housing should be protected from those pieces of regulation to be weaponised against them. So yeah, I think this framework allows for us to have a really good, robust conversation about development in relation to the environment. And I'm really happy with the way the government's going with this reform, actually. I think it will address a lot of the problems that exist currently. So yeah, the last thing I want to say is that the theme this year for the Cook Island Language Week is A tui tui a o ki te one o tōku ui tupuna, which means connect me to the soil of my ancestors. So I thought that was a nice note to end it on. Yeah.
Kia ora. Right, does anyone want to take anything separately? So that's 2A, B, C. Oh, sorry. So, okay, so should we do 2A, B, and C, and then we'll do the rest of them? Anything else? Have we done? We've done. Sorry, I've now. Right. So, yeah. Okay.
Not that you have to take it.
So do you want? Yeah. So we're just going to do 2A, B, and C first.
What about D and E?
Sorry, I'm a bit. Now I'm looking at. Sorry, I was looking at this. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep. So.
These still need to be voted.
Yeah. Sure. So 2A to E. Can we vote on that as a block? Is everyone happy with that? I don't want. No, it's just, well, we've still got to vote on.
It's the substantive because Councillor Paul moved.
Yeah. But we're just doing the 2-1 and then we can do the rest of it. Yeah?
Yes, so we can do
Just
2 and then 2A,
Yep.
2B, 2C.
Or does anyone want to take anything separately? You want to do it as a block, number 2? Okay, right, right. So we're voting.
We just need to clarify exactly what is being voted on.
Okay, so 2A to E. Okay.
It's taking 2.
2 separately, and then we'll do the, yeah. 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 Okay, that's what we needed. Okay, so what we're going to do, we'll do it separately. So 2A first of all, please.
Can I ask for a clarifying question, which
of course
I wasn't quite tuned in, but so is this a substantive? So approval of 2A through to, or 2A or 2 approves submission to
No,
go in?
we'll just do the A part, and then we'll do the 2 separately. I think we'll just deal with the things that Councillor Paul added on first, and then we'll do the rest of it. Okay. Yeah. So sorry. So yes, it's just okay. So we're going to go on just on A of the number 2, but we're not voting on 2. Okay, is that clear as mud? Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So let's vote. Yes, which is fine. Got no problem. And so we'll take a division on all of these 2, please. Thank you. Okay, thank you. B of 2. Okay, thank you. C. Thank you. D. Thank you. And then finally E. Thank you. Right, now, does anyone want to take anything separately of 1, 2, without the A, B, C, D, E, 3, 4, 5, and 6? The rest of it. Okay, let's just do a section at a time then. So first of all, we're going to vote on number 1, receive the information, just to be... does anyone want to do 3, 4, 5, and 6 together? No, okay, look, let's just do 1. Let's just do 1. Okay, let's do, it'll be quicker. Yep.
It's longer to negotiate than it does to actually do it.
Councillor yep, okay, lovely. So this is number 2 now. So this is just approving the submission, but without all those additions, because we've just voted on those, obviously. No, it's just whether you approve the submission. Yeah, yeah. I was just taking officer advice. Yep.
All of those A through E.
So it just does give anyone who doesn't want to make the submission the chance to vote against it if they wish. Yeah. Andy? Thank you. Now, 3, 4, 5, and 6, are people happy to vote on those together? Or, sorry, Nicola, you wanted to take the 5 separately. Okay, so let's do 3, 4, and 6. Yep. 6. Oh, sorry. No, sorry, no, there's no 6 now, sorry. So just 3 and 4. Sorry, because the numbers have changed. 3 and 4 now. No, it didn't. Sounds like. Okay, now, Nicola, do you want to vote A, B, C, D, E separately? Again. Oh, sorry, A, C, E. Or one block. One block? Okay, so, yep, thank you. Sorry. Yep, it's just A, C, E. Terry and Liz. Thank you very much. Right, we're done, and now we'll get to work to incorporate those changes. Right, Councillor Condie. officers. Sorry, just too institutionalised. Right, have we got Helen here? Welcome, Helen.
It's on permanently.
It's broken at the moment. Very, very dangerous.
So just be careful what you say. Yeah, it does. Right. Okay, so Helen, thank you. We've obviously read the paper, so if there's just anything extra you need to say, and then we'll take questions.
Just before Helen briefly introduces the paper, I just want to acknowledge her work, because this is her last day. Yeah. Well done. She's off to be an international negotiator in the UK, negotiating one of these post-Brexit treaties.
Wow.
So there you go. Well done.
I'm only gone for a year. I'll be back. Yep, so we're presenting the new traffic and parking bylaw, which has been created following a review of the current Part 7 traffic bylaw, which is part of the Wellington consolidated bylaw. And it follows the adoption of the parking policy last year. We've completed consultation, and a full copy of all the submissions have been provided to you, and there were oral submissions at the meeting in June. The largest area of feedback was on the unformed legal roads and beach access issue, particularly the South Coast, where people thought that the council was going to be closing access, which we're not. So what we're proposing is to include new powers in the bylaw so that the council can, by resolution, manage access on unformed legal roads. There is no proposal to stop the unformed legal road down at the South Coast. Other points that came through in the consultation was that motorcyclists are still keen for the council to provide more motorcycle parking in the CBD in particular. But there were no significant changes to the proposed bylaw following consultation, as it was largely positive with what we were proposing. And following adoption by the council, we'll be able to start more fully implementing the parking policy, and so there will be a rolling schedule of changes and new and amended traffic resolutions coming through. Separate to the bylaw review, we also asked the question about how to manage the parking on footpaths and pedestrian access on footpaths. And through the consultation, we've got lots and lots of suggestions on this. And what we've presented in the paper are the options that officers feel are the most feasible and are in line with other council policies. But these are operational issues separate to the bylaw itself. And that's it from me.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Condi?
Thank you. As you said, one of the key issues was around the unformed legal road and beach. And one of my questions was that there's, in the bylaw, when we talk about that you cannot drive or park or whatever on a beach, there's no definition of what a beach is. Is there a definition like in the land transport rule, or like what's a beach?
I couldn't find a definition of beach. In the Land Transport Act, a beach is defined as a road, and that's what they've got in the Act. So the beach is a road, and that unformed legal road is a road. But what we've proposed in the bylaw is the ability for the council to either permit access on a beach where we feel it's warranted and isn't going to damage the environment. But then we're also put in a provision that will allow the council to restrict and manage access on an unformed legal road where it is causing damage to the environment.
And as a follow-up to that, I think that some of our unformed legal roads, like around the South Coast, are on beaches. So one of my questions was like, where an informal legal road is on a beach, which of those two provisions like supersedes the other one?
So when you're driving on the unformed legal road, and they are mapped, the unformed legal roads, you're on the unformed legal road. If you come off it towards the sea, then you've gone on the beach.
Right. Other questions?
I had one more.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
That's
of
right.
course.
I just had one more about we had a submission from the people in Hankey Street, and I think there was also some feedback from Imperial Terrace talking about how we could deal with streets where, as we move parking off of the footpath, there's not really enough room to do with those sorts of things. How did we respond to those? Have we responded to those people directly? So you've got a response kind of in the report, but have we gone back to those submitters and responded to them about their concerns and how we might deal with the issues on those streets, given that obviously they feel strongly enough about it they came out to talk to us?
We haven't from the policy team. I'm not sure what the engineering team have done and who they've talked to. They have been having some conversations with some community groups already. So yeah, I'd have to check with them who they have and haven't talked to.
Okay. Yep. Any other questions? Okay. Oh no, Councillor Rush.
Yeah, sorry, Helen, and thanks for all your work. We're going to miss you. Can you just talk through the options that you've that you mentioned in regard to footpath parking? Because I thought that we had come to a view that, not unanimous, I know that we were not going to have footpath parking, so you've had some feedback, there are some options. Can you maybe just talk through how some of the issues raised by submitters can be dealt with?
So the question we asked was, how do we manage the change in our enforcement process? So as you say, we haven't changed the law, so parking on a footpath is still an offence. But what people came back to was ways in which we can respond to that. So on page 41, there's the table where we've recorded the ideas that came from the public that we feel are feasible options and in line with like the sustainable transport hierarchy and in line with the parking policy. So for example, we may have to go and put more broken yellow lines on some streets where there clearly isn't enough room to have cars parked, say, on both sides and have fire trucks going up through the middle. Or we could, again, probably through using broken yellow lines, have parking on one side of a street only, not on both sides. Or where a street and where the traffic flow provides for this, we could make it a one-way. Or like on some of the streets already, you have the priority, I'm not quite sure what the technical word is, but you have a priority up and down arrow to let cars, I don't know what they're called, going up and down the street. So it's those types of ways of managing. So you can have some parking, but you also have the traffic access and the fire truck access.
But there's no parking on footpaths, though.
No, we're not.
Yeah, you're not making some sort of discretionary opportunity for enforcement officers to.
Enforcement officers always have discretion for any of the offences that they are out there seeing, and that's written in the Land Transport Act, so that won't change.
Thank you. Councillor Foon.
Kia ora, Helen, and thank you for the great work. Just if I am asked, what I would like to be able to answer with a yes or a no, is the council planning on reviewing the use of the the road around to Red Rocks at any stage in the future?
Yes, we are going to be looking at the use of that road and the issues that seem to be coming through from like landowners and concern from DOC and some of the evidence that they've seen in terms of the harm to wildlife. But our officers will be going out and proactively engaging with users, with the property owners and with the landowners before making any decisions about what to do in terms of access on that road.
Right, and have we got a timeline for that, roughly?
I think they're waiting for this to go through.
Okay,
And
to
then,
progress that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. And Helen, best of luck, and thank you for everything you've done while you've been here. Thank you. Right, Councillor Conley now.
Thanks. Just for ease, sorry team, I know that I'm a bit disorganised this morning, but Councillor Foon, I saw your amendment. Would you like me to just include that with the substantive? Yeah. Hattie, everything that I've got and what's come from Councillor Foon, if we can just all put that together. Sorry team, I'll just give Hattie a moment to... Cool. All right. So you can see on the screen we've got a few changes there. I'll start, I guess, by just talking through 13, 14 and 15. And Councillor Foon, if you like, maybe you can stick in the paper and then you can speak more extensively to yours. Excellent. We're working it up on the fly. So 13, I've put together on admittedly very short notice, but I think a number of the questions that I had when I was reading the traffic bylaw were really related to how are we going to implement this? What's the operational decision for this? How is that going to work? They weren't actually questions about the content of the bylaw itself. I'm quite comfortable with the content of the bylaw. I think it's an excellent piece of work. But there are a number of issues that came up, for example, when we were talking about we're putting into the bylaw these new rules so that we can prevent parking but beyond 7 days. But we're going to have to put signage up and there's operational decisions that are going to have to be made for that. There was some comments we had back when we were asking about shared use zones during consultation about people asking about how we could improve the design to make them safer for pedestrians who are using them. As Councillor Rush was just asking with questions, we had a bunch of feedback from our community about how we might deal with the changes to how we're enforcing parking on footpaths and how that might work. So there were just a number of things that were coming out of this that I think are operational, but I think it would be appropriate for us to at least understand what the implementation plan looks like. So that's essentially the intention with 13, is that a number of things a report on a number of things will come back to the Infrastructure Committee for us just to make sure that we kind of have tied off the loose ends of all of the changes that come out of the traffic bylaw process, because I really didn't want today to get bogged down in those conversations because we actually don't have the answers to a lot of that stuff right now. And so that was the intention there. You know, if we've got other things that you think should be in that report, I'm sure we can work that out. The number 14 was just missed off. It normally would be in there, that if we have any editorial amendments, we can just finalise those. And then 15 is from Councillor Foon, which is asking that officers actually go ahead and progress what we can do on engine braking noise around asking for monitoring, and I'm sure Councillor Foon will speak to that. Having just introduced that, then I just wanted to say, you know, this is such a massive piece of work that's really looking at the reason we came back to review this is because of the new parking policy. We needed to make all these changes to the traffic bylaw to enable that. A huge piece of technical work and really has been excellently done, I think. You know, the biggest issue that we had during consultation was around this unformed legal road and beach and how that's going to work for the Red Rocks community. And perhaps that might be another item that could come in our report back about how we're going to deal with you know, if we've got some future work coming on Red Rocks about how that's going to play out as well. But just trying to untangle where we're at with unformed legal road and beach and whatnot. And, you know, this essentially the principle for unformed legal road is that you can drive on it unless council restricts it in some way. Whereas the principle for the beach is that you can't drive on it unless council permits it in some way. And the bylaw gives us, as council, the ability to restrict access to unformed legal road in various ways and the ability to permit access to the beach in different ways. that was probably, I think, one of the most complex pieces, but I think the staff have done a pretty good job of untangling that complexity for us. So thank you, Helen and team. I'm not going to speak much more than this, but just to say I really, recommend the traffic bylaw. It's an excellent piece of work, and it's a really important building block for us in moving forward with the parking policy and the number of transport changes that we want to make around the city.
Thank you. Councillor Foon, do you wish to speak now?
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Condi, for the introduction. So the amendment that I have there is in relation to the engine braking noise that we have Councillor Fitzsimons and I regularly listen to as one of the weights for the city that the Brooklyn and Ōwhiro community bear for the waste that we create. And actually, because we run a commercial operation with our landfills, so we're competing on prices. So we also have trucks coming from out of town through the Brooklyn community to the other two landfills there for their construction and demolition. And I don't know if any of you have spent time on Brooklyn Hill Road, but it is quite alarming. It's a very uncomfortable experience. And of course, noise rises, and so Brooklyn's on a hill, and so many of the houses in that area experience this ongoing noise. It is something we've started to do with officers, so it was with great joy that I saw it come up in this bylaw, and that there is an action that we can take. But the bigger action, and so I really appreciate the process. That was a similar process that officers advised a few months or even maybe a year back. It will take a lot of time, so my suggestion is that we start on that as soon as we possibly can. Councillor Calvert, Councillor Fitzsimons and I discussed it this morning, and we will put that onto the work program, not ahead of anything else. So as officers come to it, that'll be the appropriate time to commence. But I think the reality is here, the opportunity is in building relationships with the truck drivers and the heavy vehicle associations, and actually we need to create that. Officers declined my offer to have cups of tea with all the trucking companies, which I would really like to do. Councillor Rush might come along. But I think we've also got other issues that we need to work with our trucking companies on. Unless we can stop wasting overnight, then we won't need to go through this process at all. So until we get to the point where we don't need landfills, we will need to work with the trucks, and this is one way we can start minimising noise, but go about it building relationships first before we move into the enforcement stage.
Thank you. Councillor Paul.
Very briefly, I was just wondering with your 13 and the new signage and stuff, I was just reflecting on what we learnt yesterday at Audit and Risk about the fact that we have like way more signage than other TAs, and like how that's a significant part of our like road maintenance budget, or I can't remember exactly what Brad said. But I've also seen some TikToks, if you know what those are, about the confusing nature of our street signage. Like there's some really good videos out there showing how confusing our signage is. So I just wonder, like, is that something worth looking at? Is like more and more signage everywhere? Is it clear? Yeah, a bit of a TikTok study. I'm happy to help. But yeah, I just really wanted to just also thank Helen. So that's something you could respond to. Yes. Thank Helen for all your hard work, and also thank you to Brad for his ongoing responsiveness to residents, and especially the broken yellow lines on Myrtle Crescent. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Other speakers? Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. I will support Councillor Foon's amendment, given that. That's all right, and I hope it's quite interesting about engine braking noise. So I hope you will be supportive of the engine braking noise on the trains going up and down the Johnsonville line as well. So as it causes a disturbance. So yes. Look, thank you for the officers for this. Look, I'm not going to support this bylaw going in. I noticed one of the options was that we could put, we didn't need to do anything. We'd leave status quo and wait till 2026. My reasons is because there's reference to the parking policy, and we put in a parking policy. We were we were assured at the time that there would be a progressive implementation of that policy, and relying on dependencies such as a good, reliable, frequent public transport system, which offered an alternative to people, so they didn't need to use their cars. What we're seeing actually is that we don't have a frequent, reliable bus service, yet we're still making changes. And so, look, I worry that we're going with this bylaw in it. We're putting the bylaw in even before we've finalised our trading in public places policy as well. And so what we're doing is we're doing a bylaw before we've done the policy in that respect. And we had this issue a few years ago on this council. I think it was in the previous term, and I can't remember what it was about. And we were assured that we will not be putting bylaws in place before the policy had actually been determined. So, whereas I'm sure the bylaw has got some good ideas in it, but overall, I can't support it because I think what will happen is we will say, well, we've got this bylaw, so we can do this, and with actually not taking into account some of the other dependencies that we thought would be in place. So given that the officers had put forward an option, and I'm not going to move an amendment for you to vote on that option because I know the flavour of this particular council around the table, but I will be supporting the bylaw going in.
Okay, any other speakers? I'll just briefly speak, which is again to say thank you to Helen because there's a huge amount of work. I will be pleased to support the bylaw because I think it is a minor adjustment to our car culture, and I am pleased to see that, you know, we are continuing to see some restrictions on some of the possibly slightly undesirable behaviour, like driving on beaches, parking boats on footpaths, that sort of thing, which I don't find particularly helpful. And I will just say, Councillor Condi, I take a reasonably hard line on parking in the inner city. I have lived in Mid-Hankey Street, for example. This is a place where parking should not be such a problem. This is a very walkable neighbourhood. So I think we just need to think really, really hard about responding to concerns about that. But nevertheless, we do hear about this issue regularly at our Mount Cook Mobilised meetings, so I'm sure we'll have further conversations. I will say, though, I'm a little bit concerned about the provision of shared paths. I'm not a fan still, and I'm only, just tolerating them until we can get our cycle lanes up. I don't think they're great for most pedestrians, actually. There's people, they're whizzing behind you and you can't hear them, and it just doesn't feel safe. And we do hear continually from the disabled community that they have some concerns too. Councillor Condi will respond to this point, of course, but can I just warn you that signage is not a small issue and it can be very, very huge. In fact, there's probably still an amendment on the table from about 10 years ago. Councillor Ahipeni Mercer wanted that issue to be looked at. Yeah, and some rationalising, and there's that wine trail sign at the beginning of Oriental Parade, which it's very odd, but it's quite complicated, and so that might end up being a rather large piece of work. But anyway, if people want to do that kind of thing, I guess that will be some benefit. But anyway, look, it's good. It's good. We're ticking off something else. We're getting something done, and very pleased. Ms. Kelly.
Can you just confirm, it's a question, could you just confirm that Councillor Colbert raised that the policy hasn't been reviewed but we're implementing a new bylaw?
Speak to that.
Somebody for you, the Chair?
Yeah, through the right of reply, thank you. Anyone else? Deputy Mayor Free.
I'd also really like to thank Helen, and I'm really sorry you're leaving us, but it does sound like an amazing opportunity. Good to hear that you're coming back. There's been a huge amount of work done. I'm really supportive of this policy. I do take on board Councillor Calvert's point about the public transport, but the relationship that we're working on with the Regional Council and the partnership that we're going through with Let's Get Welly Moving, I think has opened the communication. I do have confidence that this is a transitional this is a transition that we're going through. This document supports the transition we need to go through to make a more livable city and moving more people with fewer vehicles and elevating the hierarchy for pedestrians and active and public transport. I do think we've got work to do finding things like bus parks, and I'm very, very opposed to a traffic resolution that's coming to us about bus parking actually, but that doesn't mean to say we don't need to do it. I do notice in here it says things like bus parking will be as part of a neighbourhood plan, and I think that's, that holistic kind of work is the work we really need to do to get good solutions for everybody, and they can be found. They don't make everyone absolutely thrilled, but you can get solutions which people recognise as fair and appropriate for the needs of the entire community. I thank Councillor Matthews for all the work she's done elevating the need for disability parking and accessibility, and other councillors who've spoken to that. And I also remember the thing about excessive signage, and I think there is a point there at which the signage is actually clutter and detracts a lot from the amenity, just the general clarity, and actually it gets in the way more than it helps. So there's work to be done about all those things to make our city completely livable. But I think that this document is an important step forward, and yes, we could have waited to review it, but actually things are changing so fast that I know we are reviewing it in a 5 or 6 year time frame, which is quite quick for us, but the way things are changing in the space, I expect we probably will be reviewing it again another 5 or 6 years, because it will be another step change in what we need to do. Anyway, definitely supporting, and thanks again for all the hard work.
Councillor Rush, sorry I didn't see you before.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had some concerns around this, but I'm minded to support it, but with the caveat that I might come to a different conclusion when it comes to council. But for now, my concerns are around the shared paths as well, Madam Chair. But I do note that there is discretion for the council to take a sensible approach and to ensure that those walkways that have got a high number of pedestrians can remain unshared, so that can be mitigated. Also concerned about the pilot scheme and no consultation in setting up pop-ups and so forth. I've got a history of not supporting them, but I also note that is also for temporary measures, so that a full consultation will still take place in the event that we want to make those permanent. So I'm leaning towards being okay with that. But so on balance, I'm going to support.
Thank you.
Well done, Helen. Goodbye.
Any other speakers? No. Right, Councillor Conde, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I guess I'd just like to start by saying that mostly what's in this traffic bylaw, it gives us powers, but we don't have to use them, right? And that was kind of what Helen was saying about the Red Rocks situation, right? This bylaw gives us some powers about unformed legal road and beach and all of that, but we still have to make future decisions about how those might be used, and we still have those choices about whether to use them, how to use them, where and when. So nothing that's in this bylaw kind of forces us to do anything. It gives us options. It gives us the tools to do things. And I would say that, Councillor Rush, your comment about pilot schemes, for example, it doesn't force us to do pilot schemes. It lets us do pilot schemes if we think they're a good idea. For me, that's really, I think, where, as I said with my number 13, I kind of have some questions about how this is all going to be implemented. But for me, the bylaw itself is really just a framework that gives us a bunch of tools. They've tried really hard to future-proof it, so we won't need to review it in 5 years, because they've tried to give us a toolkit that will be fit for the future. Whether we'll actually be able to pull that off or not is another question, but hopefully. I think, if coming back, Councillor Calvert, to your comments, if we don't pass this traffic bylaw now, we basically can't implement the parking policy. So you were talking about we're doing a bylaw before a policy, but actually the main policy that underpins this bylaw is the parking policy. You don't get to interrupt me. So the main policy that underpins this bylaw is the parking policy, and we have passed that, and it all has gone through. And if we don't pass this bylaw, then we essentially cannot implement the policy that we've all agreed to. So it actually is almost undermining and undoing a previous decision that we've made by doing that. Yes, the trading in public places policy work is ongoing, but the overlap between that and the traffic bylaw is small. And those two teams have been working incredibly closely together. Yes, we do sometimes have a problem at council of the left hand not talking to the right hand, but that has not been the case in this piece of work. Helen has been working incredibly closely with the team working on the trading in public places and the footpath policy. We know that those pieces of work are very joined up, and what's been put in place in the traffic bylaw allows for all the work that's happening in the trading in public places policy that's happening. So those considerations have been taken very seriously by staff, and they have addressed them very well. So I don't think we should have any concern that what's in the traffic bylaw will be inconsistent with the trading in public places policy. That work has been happening hand in hand. I think the other thing I wanted to address was just this issue around progressive implementation. And yes, the parking policy was about progressive implementation, but this traffic bylaw will enable us to do things like improve the bus service. So if you want to improve the bus service, we need to do things like being able to put in more broken yellow lines around bus stops so that they can easily get in and out, looking at narrow streets where buses get stuck. Greater Wellington gave us some really great feedback about it's not just fire engines that sometimes have issues getting stuck on our streets, and that we would need to be joining that up. So that it's not that we're going to suddenly, again, we've got these tools, we don't have to suddenly use all of them right away. The bylaw gives us tools, we will start to use them, we can make some changes that will hopefully improve the bus service, and as that happens then we can make other changes. It's going to be iterative, it's going to happen over a period of time. The last thing I just want to talk about was the confusing street signage, and yeah, I can imagine that would be a massive piece of work. But there is some work happening in the trading in public places work around street clutter and advertising signage and that kind of thing. So there might be that might be somewhere where we could an opportunity to hook that conversation in. But anyway, I would just thank again staff for all their work and commend all of you to support this traffic bylaw. We will have many more conversations about each traffic resolution as they come in front of us, about each pilot scheme, about whether we think it's a good idea. This is just enabling us to do those things. It's not forcing us to do anything at all.
Thank you. Right, does anyone wish for anything to be taken separately? Number 2. Okay. Okay. Right, so should we do 2 and 3 first? And then anything for the additions? It's just 2 and 3. Okay. Right, so we're going to vote on 2 and 3 first. So if we just put that up on the screen. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you very much. And then all of the other ones, 1 and then 4 to whatever the last one was now. 15. Yep, thank you. Oh, did you vote? Okay, so we'll change that. Thank you very much. All right, excellent work, team. Thank you very much. Right, we are now going on to the Forward program, which Ms Mueller and Mr Hodgetts will... Okay, sure. We'll introduce... Who wants to go first? Do you want to speak to it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, this is the Forward Work Programme for the Planning Environment Committee for the next 2 meetings. I want to acknowledge some work we're doing with the Chair and Deputy Chair on bringing back to the committee a more comprehensive 12-month programme. And staff are currently working on a draft of that to be worked through with the chairs.
Okay. Ms Mueller, is there anything you want to say? Does anyone have questions of the staff?
Yeah, just can I ask that the Berempore Village upgrade response back to the petition, takes into account the huge amount of consultation that already went on with that community and the commitments made, and is quite serious in its response, because that community were led to believe that that upgrade would happen, and it hasn't been. It's obviously now back in the LTP, but I just want to get a sense of responsiveness and reflection on that history, if that's okay.
Thank you. Anything else? Oh, Rebecca. Yeah. Councillor Matthews, sorry.
Just quickly, and it's more into that feeding into the conversation about the 1 year program, which is great that we've got an opportunity to do this now. But there's been quite a lot of sort of conversations and discussion about consenting and where our consenting is at, and that's so it'd be great to come back with some conversations about how we're actually tracking in terms of the housing that's being developed in Wellington, and how our processes are kind of responding to that. So I think it would be a really good conversation to have at this meeting over the next couple of months.
Thank you. And we're going to be doing more monitoring, so that will be one of them. But just to give you some reassurance that the table should have been, that showed the number of consents increasing, should have been given a bit more prominence in the article. Yeah, but anyway, good question. Right, anything else? Okay, well, I'm just going to move it. Councillor Paul, would you like to second it? And look, I just will briefly speak to the fact that I will want to do quite a lot of work with our team here about making sure that it's really well structured, that we keep ourselves accountable, we keep ourselves focused and disciplined to get some stuff done, and that, yeah, we do take that monitoring role very seriously, and that, you know, my usual practice is to make sure that we do prioritise the big chunky stuff at the start of a meeting, and then we, you know, the things that don't require so much attention. The Ford program, actually, we were just discussing that this morning, is very ambitious, so we're going to have a busy few months until the end of the year to get a lot of things done, but that will be very exciting. Councillor Paul, do you wish to say anything? Councillor Day.
Did you want to sort of, I guess, raise that there may be have to be an extra meeting before December for this committee, just given the workload? At some point there may have to be an extra one in the month.
Yeah. Yes, that's a very good point. October is looking very hairy with the district plan, and then a whole lot of other issues which are important too. So yes, so we'll be all working together as a whole council team to make sure that we are organising our meetings properly and we're not having too much on in one per week. Anything else? No. Okay, let's vote. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, the last paper, action tracking. Do you wish to say anything? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is one of the first actions tracking paper that we have done for a committee. It's intended to be quite high level, so not to give a very detailed information about each individual action, just that they are progressing or whether they have been completed. The intention is that each action would kind of appear so long as it was in progress, and then once it was completed it would show for that one report and then be removed for the following meeting, so that we don't have a hugely overwhelming table of completed actions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Ms Mueller? Councillor Condi.
I guess one of my questions is around, so I'm looking at this just as an example. One of them says direct officers to work with Greater Wellington Regional Council on air quality monitoring, and it says complete. I guess, right? It's like, clearly I think what that complete means is that, I don't know, an email's been sent or something's been reached out, or, you know, but I guess my question is how do we keep track of those sorts of, like certain things like the submission got sent, like that's definitely complete. My question is how we think about how we deal with some of those things where it's like we might have kicked off a piece of work, so we've completed it in terms of the fact that a work program has started, but the work program isn't complete, and how we might deal with that, because I'm sure that'll come up a lot.
I'm just looking towards Stephen here as well, but he might be better to answer this. You're absolutely right, Councillor. There will be instances where pieces of work will be in progress and you'll need a bit more detail in terms of what that progress looks like. But I'll let Stephen talk to you.
Yes, and we've responded to an email that Councillor Fitzsimons sent in. Just bear in mind, this is kind of the first month that we've done this, so we're welcome to feedback. And I think probably some of the responses in terms of completed or in progress probably need a little bit more expansion, but what we were saying to Councillor Fitzsimons, if there is a more detailed report, let's just say on social housing, where we might be up to with that, then that would be an item to actually add to the forward agenda or a request so that we can properly report back. This is not really intended to be a really detailed response, but I think we're kind of in between at the moment with some of our responses on the table are a bit brief to kind of be helpful. So think of it as a work in progress, and if you've got any feedback, we'd be pleased to take that on board.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, it's not a question. Okay. Right, so I will introduce the paper. So first of all, I'd like to thank officers for being responsive. I think this is a huge step forward, so that's much appreciated. I also want to thank Councillor Fitzsimons because it was actually her that raised this issue about where actions were happening, and so I'm really grateful to you, Councillor. I think that was very helpful. Look, I think that's great that you're asking for feedback, Mr. MacArthur. I think what we'll need is just look at the structure, just basic things. When are things due? Who's responsible for delivering them? And it might be that probably what would be more useful for me is rather than having every recommendation listed, we just keep a track of the things where there is actually an action required. That's probably more, I would personally find that more useful. And what might be helpful just as part of the forward program is it will, for the big things, we can actually track them. They're kind of like there, or they're actually nearly there. There might be a way of just representing that sort of in a graphical form, and that I think would be quite useful. Now, obviously, this is very complex where you're sort of doing let's get Welling moving. Well, that's never going to be complete. And in fact, I imagine people will still be arguing about this in 40 years' time. So that can be a little bit tricky. But I think this is an accountability mechanism, so it's really great to be able to show how we are doing. So I think... Thank you to everyone. Right, Councillor, seconder.
I can second and talk.
Okay, and then would you like to speak, and then Councillor Condi? Thank you.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to second. I just, this is a huge improvement on where we were, so it's great. But I guess one of the key reasons for this action tracking, which has been described as action tracking, is making sure that once we make a decision, it filters into the organisation. So if you look at number 30, note that Wellington City Council supports Gordon Wilson apartments on the terrace being turned into student accommodation. So I expect that if we get a media query, for example, or a query from Kāinga Ora about those flats, that the official position of the council is relayed that we want them to be turned into student accommodation, and that when there's a meeting regularly with the university about things going around the city, that we reiterate, and that is at an officer level and that is throughout the organisation. So I guess I'm just not yet confident that that would happen. So it's here, but where else is it, and how does it filter into the organisation? And there's a bunch of them that could fit that. So I think that's a bit of the challenge, is making sure that when these issues come up in a few months later, it's actually filtered into different work streams. And so I think about the Civic Square one. I mean, we made a clear decision. The council will go back to Civic Square. So all work on Civic Square needs to be done on that basis because that was our decision. And I'm still not quite confident that that's filtered into the organisation. So, but it's a work in progress. I get that. That's a great first step.
Thank you. Councillor Condi.
Yeah, I guess just kind of responding to you, Iona, that I think it would be really useful. Some of these things that are in progress are already on the forward work program. So it'd be great to say in progress, this is, the paper report back's on the forward work program for this date, and then we can see, well, actually that we know that's coming back to us, so we have confidence we're going to see it again. And then I think that does also then kind of address that something like the Gordon Wilson flats, for example, is probably not an item that's ever going to come back on the agenda. So, it'll kind of sit there and you can kind of see it's in progress, but it's not coming back to us, so that'll get us thinking about what do we need to do to feel confident that this is completed? What actions do we need to take? So I think that could be a useful thing where if we can see items where they are coming back on the forward program, but we can see in progress items that maybe we don't have a report back scheduled, then that lets us know we need to think about how we chase that one up. I think that could be really helpful going forward as well.
Thank you. Any other contributions? Councillor Rush. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess you said the word Gordon Wilson flats, and so I'll sort of have to say something, I suppose. So
Oh, no. We're talking about action tracking. We are.
Well, no. But I mean, what the council agreed was a particular resolution at the time with the information available. We hadn't spoken to the university.
No,
we didn't understand
actually,
their challenges. It is not an ongoing resolution. It's obviously or position that should be taken.
Councillor Rush. Okay.
Oh,
we're just talking about the action tracking, but I think the point will be heard by officers just about how these things are interpreted. Right, anyone else? I need to say, Councillor Fitzsimons and Conley, thank you very much. Those are useful contributions, and I am sure they've been heard by officers and will help with the process as we go forward. Right, let's vote. Thank you. Heritage experience, you know. Right, carried. Thank you. District Plan Working Group at 1:30. Encourage everyone to come along if you can, because we're going to have a big document coming in October, and it will be good for people just to learn and absorb as much as possible. That's correct, yep. So you can go and have a lunch break now, a proper lunch break before we go back and sit in a room. Okay, thank you. All right, the karakia. Unehea, ki te uru tapanui. Kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua. E te ara takutu. Ko ia rā e rongo, whakaria a kike ronga. Kia wātea, ai rā kua wātea. Kia ora everyone, great meeting. Thank